Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, November the 3rd, 2025. I want to talk about the stabbing in the UK, where there was a mass stabbing on a train going from Doncaster to King's Cross, London, and this event has got a huge amount of news coverage, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to look at the astrology of this event. And there are a couple of charts to look at. You've got the chart of when the train left Doncaster at 6:25 in the evening on Saturday, November the 1st, and then of course you've got the astrology of when the stabbings actually took place. But before I consider this event, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Monday, November the 3rd, 2025. So here is the chart for today, set for noon New York time. And today there is not a huge amount going on. You can see that the moon is at 15 degrees Aries, and the moon is not really making any aspects. I mean, it has made a trine to Mercury. So that that moon trine Mercury was really more about yesterday, and it's applying to a square of Jupiter, but that square to Jupiter doesn't happen until tomorrow. So perhaps because of the moon not really making any aspects, that might indicate that not a huge amount, is going on. Because when you look at a chart, you should look at the moon. The moon really is important, and more important than the sun, I think, in many respects. That's sometimes forgotten. And the moon, does talk about process. It talks about action. And so because of the moon's position, even though it is in Aries, and Aries is supposedly quite a dynamic sign, it is about making things happen. The question is, are we really able to see things through? And we've got another aspect today. We've got Venus making a quincunx to Saturn. So there is Venus at 25:57 Libra. There's Saturn 25:41 Pisces. So Venus quincunx Saturn, that might slow the day down as well. I mean, Venus, the planet of relationships, making a quincunx with Saturn. It may be difficult to get on with people. There may be a certain amount of reserve, maybe our reserve, maybe another person's reserve, and also just maybe difficult to express ourselves. Again, Venus would love to express itself. It's in Libra, but it can't necessarily. And maybe matters aren't helped by the fact that Venus is still opposition Chiron. I mean, Venus opposition Chiron likes to do things differently, would perhaps like to cause a bit of upset. Chiron is the maverick. But that quincunx to Saturn does indicate that maybe there's something that just needs to be integrated, and we haven't been able to fully integrate it into our lives. And what is that integration? Perhaps the integration is about discipline. It could be about having to follow the rules, but also having our own identity, our own way of doing things. And it just could seem sort of rather irksome, that quincunx to Saturn, but necessary. We perhaps have to follow the rules, and if we do want to get on with people, we have to consider, what are the formalities, and you might think, well, formalities, you're thinking about royalty and so on, but it's not about royalty. Everyone has their own formalities, the way they need to be approached, and maybe with Venus quincunx Saturn, that's something that we perhaps need to be aware of. Now, one thing that is about to happen is that Mars is about to move into Sagittarius. So Mars is now absolutely at the end of Scorpio. This is the last day in which Mars is in Scorpio, and Mars is, therefore, you could say, Mars is void of course. Mars isn't void of course very often. Mars has Well, Mars is not, and actually Mars is void of course. That's a question. I mean, if you use the new planets, of the discovered planets, you could say, well, Mars is making making a trine to Neptune, and tomorrow there is this trine between Mars and Neptune, but it's Neptune. It's not a traditional planet. So with Mars being late in late Scorpio, I think you could argue that it was void of course, and just again might feel that nothing much is going on. Now, having said all that, I'm sure there are going to be parts of the world where huge amounts of things are going on, where you've got ongoing wars, battles, struggles, conflicts. So it's not like nowhere on Earth is anything going to be going on, but it's like perhaps on an individual basis, how we respond to this first day of the week, Monday. It just might feel a bit flat. And you might then argue, well, why bother watching this video? I can see the argument there, because really there isn't necessarily a huge amount to say. Now, turning to the picture for Australia, setting the chart for Sydney, Australia, you can see that the moon is much earlier in the sign, but still, the moon is in Aries, wherever you are. Today. Now, if you're in Australia, or New Zealand for that matter, the moon is trine Mercury. So probably if you're in Australia or New Zealand, there may be a greater sense of action, especially early in the day. It does seem that things are happening. There are things to talk about. Probably, all things being equal, a more active, more exciting day in Australasia than in the Americas, for example. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. And there is a semi-sextile between Mercury and Pluto. So Mercury and Pluto are 30 degrees apart. And so Mercury and Pluto 30 degrees apart. What's that about? That might be about the struggle to say something. And I think there is a struggle to say something today in general. It's not necessarily because anything is blocking us. We just can't necessarily get it together. Although the heliocentric chart is indicating that maybe we regard things as being quite serious. So serious that we don't really think it's worth commenting, or the risk of commenting might be just too much, and we might have our own issues. And so something could be holding us back to some extent. Venus is making a trine to Pluto as well. So Mercury semi-sextile Pluto, Venus trine Pluto. The Venus trine Pluto is about other people, how we deal with other people. And I think it's not a good idea to look at Venus trine Pluto in isolation. You have to consider that geocentrically we've also got Venus quincunx Saturn. So Venus trine Pluto could be about changing the situation, changing the rules even. And that perhaps relates back to Venus quincunx Saturn. So Venus quincunx Saturn, I think, is about an initial issue with other people, some other people. We just can't fully express ourselves. We're not willing to express ourselves, or perhaps they're not willing to express ourselves. And it's not just necessarily about relationships. I mean, Venus, don't forget that Venus quincunx Saturn, Venus can be a planet that's connected with money, and so Venus quincunx Saturn can be a feeling of uncertainty about money, not being too sure about it, and not being too sure how much money we've got and how much freedom we have, and feeling that things may not be great. I mean, even if our financial situation objectively is brilliant, there may still be, with that Venus quincunx Saturn geocentrically, a worry there. And Venus trine Pluto heliocentrically could be an opportunity to change the situation, to just look at things in a different way. and perhaps change the rules. And by changing the situation, we may find new ways of expressing ourselves, and hopefully new ways of being positive. I think it is important to be positive. And Venus trine Pluto, Pluto, one often forgets that Pluto does have a financial link, because Pluto traditionally is about money. It's also about buried treasure. I think that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because Hades, god of the underworld. So Venus trine Pluto, maybe there is buried treasure, but we have to look hard for it, and perhaps be imaginative, and perhaps transform our outlook. Now I want to turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, November the 3rd, 2025. Aries. Mars is your ruler, and it's in the last degree of Scorpio, getting ready to move into Sagittarius. And tomorrow, Tuesday, it will be in Sagittarius. So in some ways, Aries, this could be quite a delicate time for you. Mars isn't really going anywhere now. I mean, short term, you're at the end. Okay, Mars does make a trine to Neptune just before it leaves the sign, but that might just add to the uncertainty. So Aries, don't feel that you necessarily have to take any huge initiatives. You might like to. You might like to sort of assert your authority. You might feel you have to assert your authority, because if you don't, you might get washed away. I mean, it's not a real possibility, but that might be just the way you feel about things. Especially as the moon is in Aries. With the moon in Aries, you do feel that you should be doing something. You should be responding. There's always something to respond to. But right now, perhaps you should just take stock of everything that has been going on over the last 6 weeks, and rather than think about the future, perhaps just think about the past. Just for a few hours longer. Make sure that everything is in order, and additionally, perhaps you should also be working out your own feelings and how your feelings have come together over the last 6 weeks. Because while Mars has been in Scorpio, it's been, I think, for the average Aries, quite an intense time. There's been a great deal to consider, a great deal to sort of work through, and perhaps a great deal to understand. And these times are important. And maybe Aries, you might have been strong, but you might also have had to realign yourself. And that period of realignment is coming to an end. When Mars moves into Sagittarius, when Mars moves into a fire sign, things will be different, and things will, I think, in most cases, be more positive. There'll be more things, going on, and you can, maybe turn over a new page and start initiatives which you have maybe been working on over the last month and more. And also we've got Mars trine Neptune. Now that Mars trine Neptune, okay, it might be exact tomorrow, but it's a powerful aspect right now. It's very close. Neptune, right at the end of Pisces, Mars right at the end of Scorpio. And it's a trine. It's quite an easy aspect, and it's in water signs. And so this Mars trine Neptune might be about your own feelings and how your feelings are developing, and perhaps also your sensitivity. And maybe this is the final part of Mars moving through Scorpio. You have developed a new sensitivity. You're aware of things which perhaps in the past just hadn't occurred to you. You hadn't been looking, you hadn't been feeling them. You were perhaps living from one day to the next. You weren't taking anything too seriously, but now with Mars trine Neptune, you're aware of new stuff. And of course, when you're talking about Neptune, there may well be a spiritual side to this aspect. Perhaps being slower and more considered, and realizing that there's something that exists beyond the immediate action, beyond the here and now. And if you want to understand something in a new way, perhaps in a spiritual way, this Mars trine Neptune can be useful. Now, there is a downside to Mars trine Neptune if you try to initiate anything. Now, I think that it is a very bad idea to initiate things right now. I think it's just going to be just difficult to see a result. But if you are able to get any results today, it's quite possible those results might not be desirable, because you could go chasing things, in the wrong direction, in the wrong places. You might think that something is important, Mars trine Neptune, and go after it, perhaps like sort of Don Quixote tilting at windmills. Where are you going? Do you know where you're going? Do you know why you're trying to do what you're doing? And you might not. So it's best, Aries, to wait. Even though the moon is in your sign. Moon might be in Aries, and normally when the moon is in Aries, that is a call for action. That is how you respond. But the fact that the moon is just not making any aspects indicates that if you were to try to get anything together, it just wouldn't work. And later, tomorrow, the moon will be making a square to Jupiter and a conjunction to Chiron, and I'll certainly be having a lot to say about that. But for the moment, Aries, don't feel pressurized, and just bide your time until Mars changes sign, until Mars moves into Sagittarius. Taurus. Venus is making a quincunx aspect to Saturn, and it's 150-degree aspect. These aspects tend not to be seen as being especially positive, and this Venus quincunx Saturn may, Taurus, make you feel that you can't do everything you want to do. I mean, there are things you would certainly like to do, and you'd like to get together. That's your approach. That's how you would like to be doing things, and you want to be busy. You want to be in the center of things. But when you actually try to make anything happen, it just might be not just hard work, but it might seem that you're getting nowhere, or that restrictions are just appearing just left, right, and center, or maybe you can't be bothered. You thought you were going to be bothered, but when you actually try, it just doesn't work. And this might also say something about other people, the people you perhaps rely on, the people who you thought were going to be supportive, and that support may not be forthcoming. And you certainly want to be sociable. I mean, that is part of where you are at the moment. You've got a lot to say for yourself, and that's good. But where are these words going? And you should be happy that you can just talk freely, and you don't have any expectations beyond that. And as far as other people are concerned, I think that their promises should not necessarily be relied on, and also their support. I mean, you would like to be supported, but other people, at least in the first instance, just may not be there. Now, that might be because there is something you have to do and something you have to recognize. And when you've got Venus quincunx Saturn, when you've got any quincunx, it can be a question of integration. You having to integrate something that is not always easy, but is possible. And that's the stage where we can start to look at this quincunx Saturn maybe in a positive light, because Venus, as I've said on numerous occasions, is in mutual reception by exaltation with Saturn. So Venus and Saturn have a good relationship to one another, but today you see the problem. Things that you thought were going to come together just don't come together. And maybe, Taurus, you thought they were going to come together without much effort on your part. And that might be the key to the quincunx. The quincunx is asking you not just to be hardworking, but for you also to be imaginative. You've got two things in your life which you know need to be brought together, but they seem to be completely at odds with one another. Venus in Libra. So, when you think about Venus in Libra, you think about you wanting things to be fine and harmonious and everyone to get on with each other. And also it says something about your concept of aesthetics and balance, and you want to live in an organized world with everyone cooperating and everyone being nice. And then you've got Saturn in Pisces. That's a different energy. It's a more complicated energy. It's an energy that requires sensitivity and having to deal not just with other people's blocks, but your own blocks as well, and your own resistance to change, and your resistance to seeing things in a different way. And there's a possibility, Taurus, that you're quite stubborn about it. You can perhaps see what needs to be done, but you don't want to accept it. You're saying, no, this is not how you want to do it, and you want to do it your way. And while you are stubborn, nothing happens. And you can just be happy in your absolute non-action. Well, happy, not in a particularly pleasant way. I mean, happy like being satisfied and confirmed in your own view, perhaps confirmed in your own negative view. So that's not a very good definition of happiness. But if you can be flexible, if you can see that there is a different way of looking at things, and that's what you have to do with a quincunx. You have to look at that different way of doing things. And if you can do that, then you might suddenly find a solution. And it won't be like an epiphany or anything like that. You'll just see that something works. You may not even be happy that it works. You just may begrudgingly accept that this was the right way to do it all along, and that could be how the day ends. Gemini, is it going to be a good day? I mean, I don't think it has to be a bad day. I mean, you're still getting used to Mercury being in Sagittarius, in your opposite sign, and there are certainly lots of things you would like to do, and I think that you're quite sort of imaginative at the moment, and you're open to new possibilities and new ideas, and in a social setting, you have a certain charm to you. I mean, you give the impression that you've got something to offer, and you attract some interest. But the question is, are you really going to be able to see it through? And this is not just your issue. I think that for many people, regardless of their sign, it is going to be a very difficult day if you want to see something through. Lots of possibilities. Seems that everything is in the right place, but it's just not in the right place. Things just don't work out. And I'm almost feeling this about this recording. I mean, I know I'm making this recording on a Sunday, but maybe I'm picking up the energies of Monday. And this video, by the way, is for some reason it's just difficult to make, and it shouldn't be difficult to make. Everything is fine, should be fine in theory, but it's just not working out. And maybe the reason it's not working out is because there's not a lot to say. Astrologically, today is very light, and I can say that one Gemini to another. So there could be a sense that in spite of your inspiration and your good ideas and you being ready, you're prepared, but just things just don't come together. And under those circumstances, it's easy to place blame, isn't it? I mean, you could say that it was someone else wasn't ready. You were ready. You had everything organized, but other people, that's tough, and that's just the way it is. Now, I don't think that it need be a bad day, as I've already said. I mean, I don't think that anything bad is going to be happening. So if you've got a day which is light in terms of astrological aspects, you could say there is a lack of excitement there. But it also gives you freedom. And, Geminis do value their freedom. So you can perhaps do pretty much what you want within reason without having to worry too much about, what happens afterwards, what happens next. And so you can sort of float through the day, and you can be ready for Mars to move into Sagittarius tomorrow. Mars moving into Sagittarius, I think that is a big event that may say something about you and other people and how you relate to them. I mean, there are good things to say about Mars and Sagittarius, but there could be some challenges with Mars and Sagittarius. Mars and Sagittarius can be about irritations, and so perhaps today you could ask yourself, who could be irritating? Is someone you might be close to? Everything's fine at the moment, but things may not be fine forever. So that might be something to be, but you should be thinking about. Now, one aspect happening today, in fact, it's probably the main aspect of the day, is a quincunx between Venus and Saturn. And this Venus-Saturn quincunx, potentially sounds difficult because poor Venus is quincunx Saturn. Poor Venus can't really express itself fully with Venus quincunx Saturn. At least that's how it normally works. But in this case, Venus and Saturn are in mutual reception by exaltation. So Venus and Saturn are strengthening one another. And, this might be about two contending influences which seem to be at odds with one another, but just can be mutually useful. So I would have said that Venus in Libra at some level represents your creativity. Geminis really do appreciate their creativity. It's important to you. You want to be able to do something different, and you want to do something special. So that's one way of looking at it, that Venus in Libra. But then it's quincunx Saturn. Saturn in Pisces? What's Saturn in Pisces about? Saturn in Pisces is about responsibility. It's about obligation. It's perhaps about work. If you go into work, if you have a job, it's what people expect of you. It could be what your family expect of you. And those two principles seem a million miles from one another. Your sense of obligation is undermining your creativity. Likewise, your desire to be an individual is messing things up. People don't like it. So you've got these two principles that appear to be, at odds with one another. But the challenge of the quincunx is to bring things together, and there can be a positive resolution, particularly because of that mutual reception. So there is a way, Gemini, to honor your obligations, to be aware of your responsibilities, and at the same time not to compromise yourself, not to compromise who you are, not to compromise how you present yourself, because that is another aspect of Venus in Libra. It's, how do you want to present yourself? What do you want to wear? What do you want to say? It's about you and your image, what you look like in the mirror, and that matters. But it also matters that you give people what they want, particularly if those people have authority. You are able to behave, but you can behave in such a way that you don't you don't have to compromise yourself at all. So that's something for you to think about, and perhaps that is the real challenge today. And if you can manage this Venus quincunx Saturn, you'll really see that, two aspects of yourself and your life which you thought had nothing to do with each other, were almost trying to undermine each other, can be brought together and can coexist. Cancer. If you have been watching this video so far, okay, you might not have been watching this video so far, you might have just zoomed into the Cancer timestamp, but if you have been watching this video, you might have noticed that I haven't been particularly positive. I mean, I'm not saying that it's necessarily going to be a bad day, but it's just a day where things aren't necessarily happening. And that might be the way a lot of people feel. The week doesn't start very well. It starts on a pretty flat note. Now, as far as you're concerned, I think that you can see that nothing much is happening. If you apply yourself to something and you expect to get support and an appreciation and validation, you might be disappointed because nothing seems to be going anywhere. Now, that needn't be a disadvantage. It could be that there is a situation where there isn't much pressure. No one is necessarily expecting anything. So if no one is expecting anything, you could say that the pressure is off, that you can, largely do things your way, and if things don't work out, if things go wrong, is anyone really going to notice? But maybe, Cancer, you have to see Monday and Tuesday as being, part of the same day, part of the same movement. And, we start Monday with the moon in Aries, and the moon is making a square to Jupiter. And, this square to Jupiter is not until tomorrow. But still, the moon is moving towards Jupiter. And I think that this moon-Jupiter square, which does happen tomorrow, is something that really is fortunate. It does allow you to make an impact at a time when no one else is making an impact. You have a possibility here. And I think that perhaps your key advantage is not to just focus on today, Monday, and think that today, Monday, is what it's all about. If you can think forward until tomorrow, it can make all the difference. So you might try something or start something today, and it doesn't appear to be working out. I mean, it's not that it's necessarily causing you damage, it just seems to be going nowhere. So if you're feeling that, just keep going. And, when the moon makes a square to Jupiter, then you might realize that actually things aren't so bad, that you are able to make an impact. And, the moon is in Aries, it's in a high profile sign in your chart. Jupiter is of course in your sign. And so, as the day progresses, Cancer, I think that you're going to become, increasingly fortunate. It might not seem like it at the beginning, but, under the surface, things are definitely going your way. So it's important to, not to panic or not to get disheartened if at first you seem to be going nowhere. At the same time, don't feel that you're necessarily, on your own. Venus is making a quincunx to Saturn, and Saturn is a planet in the Cancerian chart that can have quite an important connection with relationships. And with Venus quincunx Saturn, it might seem that some people are just feeling uneasy. They don't seem able to relate, or they seem to be distracted and even a bit clumsy. But that's a process of almost discovery. They're trying to work out how to deal with a new week. They're trying to deal with a new situation. And so try to make the most of other people and don't be put off, by their initial missteps. I'm not saying there are going to be missteps, but if there are missteps, or if they can't necessarily communicate very effectively, don't worry. Maybe you can help them out. Because, that Venus quincunx Saturn is not as bad as it looks, because Venus and Saturn are in mutual reception by exaltation with each other. And so perhaps what another person is looking for is something familiar, some familiar territory, something reassuring. And I think Cancer, in your own way, that's something that you can provide. And if you provide another person with security and reassurance, then they will reciprocate, and you in turn are going to feel good about yourself and also about some of the relationships you're involved in. So it's worth trying, and don't be put off by today. Just because today doesn't start off very well doesn't mean that it's all going nowhere. If you can just see through, until Tuesday, if you can see something through into tomorrow, then I think that things will slowly come together for you. Leo. Still, Leo, you want to stick to what you know. I mean, that is an important theme. And it's been a continued theme while the sun has moved through Scorpio. And there is always a danger of falling back into bad habits. When I say bad habits, I'm talking about perhaps seeing things in your own terms and not seeing other possibilities. And one reason you might fall back into sort of this default position of not wanting to know or be too involved with what's going on around you is because there might be some short-term disappointments. The moon at the moment is moving through Aries, and so you would think that moon moving through Aries is something something quite exciting, and it's quite dynamic. It is about action, so that could on the surface be encouraging, but then you quickly reach the conclusion that really nothing is happening. Despite your best efforts, you're not making an impact. And so if you're not making an impact, what is the point? Really, what is the point? You might as well just stick to what you know, stick to what you trust, and not feel that you have to not feel that you have to do anything else. And perhaps you'll just want to wait until tomorrow. Well, tomorrow I think things will be better. I mean, tomorrow Mars is going into Sagittarius. So that's certainly a big change. And I think that with Mars moving into Sagittarius, you're going to be more enthusiastic, more creative, better able to appreciate yourself and what you can contribute. So perhaps, Leo, if you really don't want to do anything, maybe you don't have to, just stew for another 24 hours. But still, I do think it's unnecessary. And what you should be looking for, Leo, is action. Now, I'm not saying you're going to be able to take successful action necessarily today, but deep down you want to do something, and deep down you feel that you do have a lot of energy at your disposal. And the question is, what do you do with this energy? And it's important that energy doesn't fold in on itself. You just staying in one place and just concentrating on one thing and getting annoyed about it and angry about it. Instead, it's just better that you kind of store this energy, let it develop, let it build up in a constructive and healthy way. And if you see opportunities to do something, to make an impact, then give it your best shot. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, because it is a day when for many people, regardless of their sign, there's a lot of promise, but in the end, nothing much happens. But still, you might see the opportunity to assert yourself. To might be something very quick, and perhaps you'll benefit in a way from other people's inactivity. If other people can't get anything together, it doesn't take much for you to stand out. So maybe that's something that you can be thinking about. But I mean, I wouldn't worry about things too much, and don't get annoyed. And do remember that things are in a process of change. And tomorrow, when Mars moves into Sagittarius, things could change quite quickly. Virgo. Well, Virgo, it's a day which is possibly somewhat downbeat. I mean, is that the right word? It doesn't seem to me that it's going to be particularly easy for anyone to get anything done. I mean, they might have high hopes of what is possible, but the reality of it is that things are almost coming to an end, and so just accept that. When I say coming to an end, I don't mean that in a sort of catastrophic way. I think a lot of people are just being influenced by Mars in the last degree of Scorpio. That's a big change coming up. Mars about to move into Sagittarius, and so Mars is a planet of energy, and Mars is going nowhere. Okay, Mars is going to a trine of Neptune. So, Mars trine Neptune is quite a subtle aspect. It's perhaps about putting your energies into things which can't be verbalized, that might have a sort of a spiritual nature. You try to talk about something and you get sidetracked. Perhaps you're getting sidetracked by your own feelings, and maybe the very act of trying to communicate is the act of opening up your emotions and becoming sensitive to what another person is thinking and feeling, and that sensitivity could inhibit communication. And again, I don't think that is much to worry about. It's just the way today is, and also your attempts to understand things, and it is a day when I think that you are trying to understand things. It just might not just get anywhere, and perhaps the reason is that you feel you're going deeper. It all seems very meaningful, but you don't actually reach a conclusion. And so, if you don't reach a conclusion today, I wouldn't be particularly worried about it. It's not a day for feeling that you've made huge amounts of progress. I mean, but that's what everyone feels like. That's today, and maybe people are just still getting over the weekend. Was it Halloween weekend? No, Halloween was on Friday, wasn't it? So Halloween is over, but it's just a time for perhaps realignment, and you're still getting used to the fact that Mercury is in Sagittarius. Mercury, yes, in Sagittarius, it sounds exciting, Mercury being in a fire sign, but from a Virgo perspective, Mercury in Sagittarius, it's quite an uncomfortable place for Mercury to be, because Mercury is in a fire sign, which sounds exciting, but it's in a fire sign which is right at the bottom of your horoscope, and so a lot of your energy is perhaps going into your own home, and perhaps dealing with your family, and perhaps also you should see Mercury in Sagittarius as like the home fires. It's not the fires out there in the world. It's your own home fire. That's where it's burning brightest, and that might be why Mercury in Sagittarius is somewhat uneasy, because you feel that there should be some excitement somewhere, and you're looking all over the place for it, but you can't see it. But the reality is that the fires are burning brightest at home, where you are. And that's what you should be focusing on. That is perhaps where your inspiration is. On the other hand, you're not without your own ability to get people's attention. If you want to get people's attention, I think you can. And maybe you're going to be helped by the fact that there isn't much going on today, but a lot of people are feeling dissatisfied for one reason or another. And there might be something about you that is ever so slightly different. You maybe can approach people in a way that is unusual. I'm not saying alarming, I'm just saying unusual. There's something different about you in a social perspective, particularly on an interpersonal level, when you're dealing with someone sort of one-to-one. You have there's something interesting about you, something that maybe people want to find out more about it. So, if you do want to introduce yourself to someone today, I think that it can be quite successful. But don't be put off by your immediate reaction, because today is not a day for seeing results. It's more a day for just being part of an ongoing process. So, for example, Virgo, you might be having a powerful impression on someone today, but you might not notice, you might not be aware of it, you might feel that they're ignoring you, but they're not. And over the next couple of days, you'll start to become aware of what kind of impact you actually had. Libra, there is not a lot going on today, for any of the 12 signs. But the one aspect that kind of stands out is a quincunx between Venus and Saturn. And quincunx aspects are often seen as being bad or certainly stressful. They're uneasy. I mean, it's not surprising they're uneasy, because quincunx represents two signs that have nothing to do with each other, 150 degrees apart. You've got Venus in Libra, quincunx, Saturn in Pisces. Libra and Pisces, they don't appear to have much in common. Although they both signs, Libra and Pisces, have a relationship with Venus. Venus rules Libra. Venus is exalted in Pisces. And this quincunx, Venus in Libra, Saturn in Pisces, as I've been saying on numerous occasions, what have I saying on numerous occasions? That Venus and Saturn are in mutual reception by exaltation. So this Venus-Saturn quincunx is not as bad as it sounds. And it could be that you start the day feeling just uneasy, that things are just not connecting, that there's just a mismatch. And so if you feel that there's just a constant mismatch, then why bother? It's just not for you. But I think that first impressions can be misleading, and you actually have an opportunity with this quincunx to really get something together. And if you feel that something is not working, if you feel uncomfortable about something, or even if you feel aesthetically repelled, then that's a sure sign that something can happen. Aesthetically repelled, I suppose we're talking about ugliness here. The way things are set up is not attractive. It just seems irreparably ugly. But don't worry, because of that Venus-Saturn reception, it would appear that you can really get things together, and you can turn things round, perhaps through your own efforts. And so if you don't like something with this quincunx, you can change it. And it's going to be much, much easier to change than you'd imagined. And for sure, there's going to be some hard work involved here, but if you work on it, then very quickly you're going to see some really excellent results, and you can really change things around. It may be possible to take something which is ugly and disturbing and to turn it into something which has its own beauty. And of course, beauty and attractiveness is often very important to the average Libran. And there's another side to this quincunx. And in astrology, the quincunx is often associated with health. And I've seen this written quite often, particularly in sort of older books, that when you've got a Venus quincunx, when you've got any quincunx, there is a health issue, and if it's in the horoscope, then it's just a pain over the course of someone's life. But we're talking about this Venus quincunx Saturn like today, and there could be a health issue here. And you may be more aware of your health than usual. And I don't think this is a bad thing. It might be that if you have some concern about your health, or you have some passing pain, or I don't know, something that doesn't work, or which just reminds you that you need to look after yourself, and that might be it. And so if something happens, or you just feel that you're not as healthy as you should be, then yeah, it might be a blessing in disguise, because it might give you the encouragement, to do something about it. And with Venus quincunx Saturn, there's a lot of work involved. It is about you looking at things in a different way. So as far as health and your lifestyle is concerned, I think that you can make a decision to create change, perhaps change your routine, change what you're eating, making sure you're eating more healthily. Maybe there are certain things you need to be avoiding, but whatever you're doing, it's not something you necessarily want to do, but if you are able to do it, you are able to get it together, I think it can be a big improvement. Do remember, I'm talking about lifestyle here. I'm not giving any medical advice, but perhaps this is a good way of taking advantage of Venus and Saturn being in mutual reception by exaltation with one another, because Venus is now in late Libra, very late Libra, and next week Venus, not next week, in fact later this week, Venus moves into Scorpio. So and I'm afraid Venus moving into Scorpio it's a shame when Venus moves into Scorpio, you could say, especially from a Libran perspective. So when does Venus move into Scorpio? It moves into Scorpio on Thursday, Friday. So yeah, a few days' time, Venus in Scorpio. The problem with Venus moving into Scorpio is that Venus, having been in a really good position, in Libra, in the sign of its in the sign of its rulership, in mutual reception by exaltation to Saturn, having all of that, it suddenly moves into Scorpio. It suddenly moves into the sign of its detriment. So Venus's condition has a massive decline. Theoretically, you probably won't really feel it, but while Venus is still strong, with this quincunx in Saturn, do something about it. Take advantage of it. And certainly in terms of your health, that seems to be something you can do. Again, I'm talking about lifestyle. I'm not giving medical advice, but think about how things could be better, how you could be looking after yourself better as well. And so this Venus quincunx Saturn, it's going to work in your favor. It can work in your favor, even though in the first instance you might regard it as being a real pain, as something that doesn't make you feel happy. Everything seems to take a long time, to be too much hard work. But if you are able to put in the work, I think that you'll definitely get the benefits. Scorpio. Now, I'm going through the 12 signs, and with the 12 signs, I'm being somewhat negative in places, because I don't think that today is particularly amazing. I mean, for anyone. And it does feel that things really aren't things that just aren't going anywhere. And that's how a lot of people feel. But as far as you're concerned, it's maybe more poignant because you've had Mars moving through your sign for a long time. Mars has been moving through Scorpio. It's been moving through Scorpio for 6 weeks or so, and now Mars is coming to the end. It's getting ready to move into Sagittarius, and there could be a sadness to that. Mars was strong. Perhaps you were able to benefit. I hope you were able to benefit in some respects from Mars moving into Scorpio. I mean, there are certain downsides to Mars being in Scorpio because you could see Mars as being an aggravating factor. And so having an aggravating factor strongly placed in Scorpio could have been a problem. Depends how you related to it. But with Mars about to move into Sagittarius, well, whatever it is, it's gone. Perhaps there's a mixed message here. On one sense, it's sad that you've lost the power, or you're losing some of your power. But perhaps it's balanced by the fact that an irritation is leaving. So it kind of depends on the situation and how you are how you've been responding to Mars. But now that Mars is in the absolute last degree, you're getting ready for a change. Maybe that suggests a time when you shouldn't feel that you need to do anything, that you need to initiate anything. You just enjoy these last few moments. Take stock of the last 6 weeks, and it's probably not a particularly good idea to start anything new, because if you start something new, you'll be kind of following the old rules, and it's not going to be a good time to be making commitments again, because you're assuming that things are going to work how they worked in the past, but that is not the case. Now Mars, while it's moving through the last degree of Scorpio, it does make a trine to Neptune. So this Mars trine Neptune, I don't think it's exact until tomorrow, but it's pretty close. And so with Mars trine Neptune, that can be quite elevating. You're aware of something else, elevating perhaps in a spiritual sense. You can see everything in a new way, and you do that by focusing on your inner world, I think, rather than your outer world. I mean, I think that from an outer perspective, external perspective, I just don't think a great deal is going on. I mean, not a great deal going on that you necessarily need to participate in. But in terms of your inner world, the world of imagination, well, I think there is a lot of action, and there's a lot to look at, a lot to perhaps to get excited about, maybe because you're getting a vision of the future, or maybe because you're getting a vision of just something else. And from an artistic point of view, if you have any artistic abilities, Mars trine Neptune can really bring them out into the open. So it's a great time for painting a picture, or for writing poetry, or for just perhaps talking about things in a very sort of flowery way. There's everything is visual here, and there are lots of colours here with Mars trine Neptune, and so Scorpio, do think about your creativity. Just before Mars moves into Scorpio, maybe just before Mars moves into Sagittarius, with this trine to Neptune, things will suddenly come together. Perhaps you hadn't made the connections in the past, but now, Scorpio, you are able to do it, and things are starting to make sense, like never before. But it's all happening on an emotional level, and it's not necessarily anything that has to be talked about, though. don't be too chaotic. It's easy to get chaotic if one's working on an inner level. One has these wonderful imaginings, but these imaginings, they can go nowhere if you don't make some effort to ground them. And perhaps with Moon in Aries, Moon is right in the middle of Aries at the moment. With Moon in Aries, you should start to initiate something. But it's not like a new beginning, but you just want to demonstrate to the world that something has happened, and you give it a go, and you may not be immediately successful, but if you start to see it through as you move into tomorrow, because tomorrow, when Mars is in Sagittarius, when you'll have Moon and Mercury both in fire signs. Tomorrow things may be clearer, and you may have a chance to initiate something. Okay, you can almost start to initiate, if that's possible. I mean, a kind of double initiation, but you initiate the initiation, but maybe tomorrow perhaps you have some chance of being able to see things through. But as far as today is concerned, don't be pressurized and allow yourself to float a bit. I think a bit of floating through the clouds of imagination, might not be such a bad thing. Sagittarius. Today's going to be fine, provided that you don't have too many expectations. In particular, you shouldn't expect there to be any conclusions. So you might start something off, you might enjoy it, and you might be hoping that it goes somewhere, but things might not go anywhere. And this just might be a problem about being too hung up on the future and thinking that the present doesn't matter. Instead, we've got to see an end, and we've got to see how it works out, and we want to see a result, and we want to see a definite benefit. And none of that may be available. It just may be that you have to live in the present and just enjoy it and not try too hard. And I think that is the best approach. And the reason I'm saying this is because of the moon. I mean, the moon is in Aries, and it's nice to have a moon in a fire sign. And the moon, as far as you're concerned, is very creative, and you have the opportunity here to enjoy life. Enjoy those small moments. Maybe they're big moments, but they just enjoy it all. But as soon as you start analyzing things and start to think about what the next stage is, that's when there might be a disappointment. And you may find over the course of the day that nothing really goes anywhere. That it's you appear to be trying hard. You had a set of goals. I don't think you should really have any goals, by the way. But if you do have particular ambitions, then those ambitions just may be thwarted. And it's not anyone's fault. It might seem to be someone's fault, or you might blame yourself, but it's just not the right time. Today is a day when things are just slow, but there's a lot of promise today. And if you get hung up on promises and start to look for results to those promises, then you could be very disappointed. So that gives you an idea about how you should deal with things, and you should just take every moment as it comes. Also remember that Mars is getting ready to move into Sagittarius, into your sign. Now, Mars moving into Sagittarius is a big deal. And it is, as far as you're concerned, very energizing. And that is certainly a lot of promise. And maybe you'll realize that promise. But we'll be talking about Mars in Sagittarius tomorrow. But for the moment, Mars is still in Scorpio. And Mars is making a trine to Neptune. And with this Mars trine Neptune, you could say that the influence of that aspect is quite spiritual. thinking beyond the here and now, thinking beyond the material world, not feeling that you need to have material results. And if you're just taking in the moment, that is, I think, very much the best approach. And additionally, today's Monday, but maybe you should see Monday and Tuesday as being kind of like the same day, the same unit of time. And it could be that things that appear not to be working today may come together tomorrow. And so maybe Monday is just a preparation for Tuesday. But I'm not saying that you have to spend a lot of time preparing. It's not a day for preparing. Because if you are preparing for something, then you're not living in the present, are you? You're living in the future. And that's not the way you should be. I mean, I'm not saying one should always live in the present. I mean, I know that from a Buddhist perspective, one's always supposed to regard, each breath as being your last, that you could die at any moment. And so live in the present, that's the way to be. That's the way to be happy. I mean, there are times to be preparing for the future, but I just don't think that's now. And with that approach, you're just going to come over as being, a pleasant person. People are going to like you. People are not feeling great at the moment. People are feeling bored. They're feeling that things aren't happening. They want something to happen. And in a relative sense, Sagittarius, you're probably quite exciting. You may not feel yourself to be exciting, but I think you are. And if you just you are yourself, that's the way you should be. And of course Mercury is in your sign now, so you can communicate in quite a fun, sparkling kind of way, but don't think beyond the situation. So if you're with someone, you're talking to someone, you're enjoying someone's company, don't think about what you're going to be doing in 5 minutes time. Just act as if this is the moment. And if you can take that approach, then I think that today can be quietly satisfying. Capricorn, you are feeling that things are slow. And you're right, things are slow. And that's the way they should be. And so there's absolutely no need to hurry things up. And also, Capricorn, don't think you're missing out on anything. You might think that you're missing an opportunity, or there's something that is really important that needs you to be there, needs you to be organizing it. You have to be physically present. That might make you feel somewhat guilty, but no, I mean, don't worry about it. And additionally, Capricorn, take advantage of what is available. And one thing that is available, which on the surface might seem a problem, is a quincunx between Venus and Saturn. So Venus and Saturn are 150 degrees apart. And, traditionally, quincunxes are seen to be difficult aspects. But it depends how you deal with them. And I think that this quincunx could be quite fortunate. Venus is in mutual reception with Saturn by exaltation. And this mutual reception of Saturn is not going to last for much longer, because in a few days' time, Venus moves into Scorpio. But now, with this quincunx, you're aware of something. Perhaps you're aware of an opportunity, but you may be thinking that you can't get it together. But Venus is still in Libra, and Libra, as I've said on several occasions, is an important part of your chart. It is connected with your ambition, where you want to go. And because Venus is in mutual reception to Saturn, you have an opportunity now to articulate the way you see things. And there's no pressure here. I said at the beginning, there is no pressure. You shouldn't feel guilty about anything. You don't have to do anything at all. But at the same time, you can present what you want and your ambitions just by being yourself. And you don't have to apologize at all. Just do what feels natural. Do what yeah what do what feels do what feels itself to be natural, and be accepting of new people, people with different ideas. Especially in a setting like your career or business. If someone comes up with a new idea or wants your attention, give everyone a chance. And that might be what that Venus Saturn quincunx is about, is giving people a chance. So if you're not in the mood to do something, see what someone else has got to offer. You're not making any commitments here. I mean, it's important to make that point. But I think that there is a way through, and there's a way for you to just be comfortable about the way things are going without you having to put much effort in. And maybe that's because you can trust another person. And trust, if you're a Capricorn, trust can be quite a difficult concept, because Capricorns, many Capricorns, they do have a suspicious mind. You know what people are capable of doing. So Capricorn, I think it is a day when you can be satisfied, and at the same time you can give other people a chance. And so, I mean, I'm not saying that today has to be super busy, super hectic. It doesn't. And Venus is still going to be in mutual reception of Saturn tomorrow, and tomorrow might be different. And with this Venus Saturn mutual reception, I have to say it's not going to last forever. So Thursday, Friday, Venus moves into Scorpio, and so when Venus moves into Scorpio, the whole mutual reception just breaks down. It's not there anymore, and it's an instantaneous thing. So while I'm saying that today you shouldn't feel guilty, at the same time you should be thinking about the rest of the week, what you're doing Tuesday and Wednesday, and what you need to get together. Because if you leave it too long, it's possible that you might miss your chance. But again, I think today's the beginning of a week. I don't think that today is hugely busy, and I think also today is just a day when things just don't come together for many people, you included. It's difficult to see something through to an absolute conclusion, and so maybe you should be focusing more on Tuesday and perhaps Wednesday rather than today. And today just might be a day of preparation, of just working out what kind of stance you're going to take without feeling that you absolutely have to do anything. Now, another thing about that Venus quincunx Saturn, it could say something about relationships, and it may say something about a particular relationship. So if you've got Venus and Saturn making this rather uneasy aspect, 150 degree aspect, it may be that you're dealing with someone who you apparently don't have much in common with. And you have different views, you have different ways of working, you have different personalities, and it might seem hopeless, but where there's a quincunx, there's a way. And there is an opportunity here to understand another person, and also to help another person understand you. And it could be that a relationship that appears to be going nowhere because there's no common ground is actually quite important. And if you're able to work on it, then this relationship could really bear fruit in many different ways. And of course, I'm not talking about any particular kind of relationship. It depends. It could be a relationship that is quite short term, that is there for a purpose. And it could well be that kind of relationship. Someone has got something to offer, and if you were to utilize this person, then they could make a big difference. They could perhaps help you be more successful. So it's very important to give people a chance, especially if you feel that there's an uneasiness, if you feel in the first instance that you don't really get on with them, that you're on a different wavelength than they are. Aquarius, Mars is getting ready to leave Scorpio, and I've talked a lot about Mars in Scorpio. I've regarded Mars in Scorpio as being being very fortunate for you, because it could have been motivating. Hopefully it was motivating, and that I'm hoping that you've managed to get a lot of things off the ground, and you've perhaps been able to tune into some of your ambitions and really have given it your best shot. But now Mars is getting ready to leave Sagittarius, so this is perhaps, you could say, the last day to take advantage of Mars in Scorpio. And Mars is making a trine to Neptune, and this trine to Neptune perhaps allows you to see things in perspective. Neptune is about perspective. Neptune is not bound by time and by ambition, particularly when Neptune is in Pisces. And so when Mars is trine Neptune, you may see the whole picture. Perhaps recently you've been focusing on parts of the picture, but now you see everything. You perhaps now see where it's all going, what you've been working towards. And this could be quite liberating. Liberating because you know that there's nothing that you absolutely have to do anymore. You had your chance. If you wanted to do something, you will have done it by now. And now Mars trine Neptune gives you that crucial perspective. And so with that aspect, you may be able to see things in terms of your broader destiny, where you're all going, where it's all going. So it's easy to think about material ambition. You have an ambition, you may or may not achieve it, and then you move on to something else. But now you're starting to see things about in terms of what it's all about. And I think that you will be helped by a quincunx between Venus and Saturn. Now, this Venus-Saturn quincunx is one of the main aspects of the day. This Mars trine Neptune, I think it's more about tomorrow, Tuesday, than today. But Venus quincunx Saturn is today's main aspect. In fact, it could be argued it's today's only aspect. And this aspect is important because it involves Saturn, and Saturn is your ruler, and Venus and Saturn very much strengthen each other. And so you can perhaps get to grips with something that you had not been able to get to grips with in the past. You'd been uncertain. You weren't sure. You weren't sure whether whether it was the right thing to do. And now with Venus quincunx Saturn, it's right in front of you. There is an uneasiness there, at least an initial uneasiness. But then you might realize that something that you were uncomfortable with is something that you can handle after all. And once you realize that could be liberating. And so there are a number of reasons why today could be liberating, because you get perspective. And I think that this Venus quincunx Saturn gives you perspective as well. And on a material level, we shouldn't forget that Saturn is in Pisces. Pisces is the sign following Aquarius. The sign Pisces in the Aquarius chart does have a financial connection. And with Venus making a quincunx to Saturn and Venus being in mutual reception to Saturn by exaltation, it becomes clear to you that there is an extra way of making money. It's a way of making money that at first you're not very happy about. You don't want to do it. But I suppose it depends on how desperate you are, maybe. But if you feel you need extra money, this Venus quincunx Saturn, I think, will show you the way. And it could be with another person's help. So so if money matters, then I think that there's an opportunity to go some way towards solving the issue, though to begin with it's not going to be entirely easy, because it's something that you maybe at some level don't want to do, but then when you think about it, you realize, it's okay. Venus quincunx Saturn can also, by the way, be about relationships. And, Venus is a natural ruler of relationships. And so Venus quincunx Saturn could just represent someone you just don't feel you get on with. At least you think you don't get on with them. But it's a quincunx, and a quincunx is about integration. And so you might be talking about, or we might be talking about a person you don't get on with on a superficial level. But if you analyze things, and if you're honest with yourself, there is enough common ground. And maybe you need people you don't get on with. If everyone is on your wavelength, where's the challenge? But if you're presented with something different and something challenging by another person, something you don't want to deal with, it does seem that you can benefit from it. And the quincunx is very much indicating that. Pisces. Well, we have a trine between Mars and Neptune. Okay, that Mars trine Neptune, it might be exact tomorrow, but it's pretty close. And of course, Neptune is in your sign. It's just gone into your sign quite recently, hasn't it? And so Mars is making the trine to Neptune. And so this Mars trine Neptune, I would see it as being quite otherworldly. It's in water signs. It involves Neptune. Mars is still in Scorpio. Remember, Mars goes into Sagittarius tomorrow. That is a big change, which I will be talking about in my horoscopes for Tuesday. And I think your priorities could change when Mars moves into Sagittarius. But while Mars is in Scorpio, making that trine to Neptune, it is otherworldly, and it gives you an opportunity to see things differently, to see under the surface, and also to move beyond the material, not to be tied to things like time and obligation and what has to be done, and even the limits of a single lifetime. We focus on this life, and this life, like nothing lasts forever. But with Mars trine Neptune, there is a feeling that some things could last forever, that some things are permanent. And Mars is also about where you're putting your energy and what you should have been putting your energy into. And so with Mars, while Mars is moving through Scorpio, hopefully, Pisces, you were able to put your energy into things which were a little bit beyond yourself. And I'm hoping that you're able to explore your imagination as well as your spirituality. And with Mars trine Neptune, it just could be that things are coming together at quite a higher level. I'm not necessarily talking about the material. I'm talking about the spiritual and the inspirational, and you're starting to make connections that perhaps you weren't able to make before. And also, you understand where things are going, and it's good to understand where things are going on a spiritual level, because in a way that links with the material as well. I mean, ideally, the spiritual should come before the material. I mean, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, if you think about the concept of reincarnation, I mean, if you believe in reincarnation, what happens between lives, when one life comes to an end and you're about to start a new life. A new life is back to the material world, back to the grindstone, and you would have hoped that there would have been some kind of spiritual development going on in between. Maybe, I mean, who knows how it works, if it works at all. I mean, reincarnation might just be a fantasy, but you would have expected some kind of development, and that's what I mean by the spiritual coming before the material, and so reincarnation is one way of looking at it, or you could just see a single lifetime having different stages, different mini lives in a greater life, and perhaps there are periods between those mini lives where there is spiritual development and spiritual alignment and realignment. And maybe that's what's going on at the moment. There's a bit of spiritual realignment going on before you go back to the grindstone, before you start to have to deal with the world again, deal with whatever it is that you have to do on a material level. So perhaps that's how you should be thinking about it. And today is a kind of a gap, a space for you to align yourself to something new and to look back at the past, look back at the lessons of the past, and just start to prepare to put those lessons into practice in the future. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now it's time to switch to the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 7, which is the army. And maybe the key point about this hexagram is that we have no moving lines. And this aligns with the astrology. If you have been listening to my forecasts, you would have known that, or you would have realized that I was kind of suggesting that maybe nothing was going to be going on. The day seems just empty Monday. It's just nothing is applying to anything, and so it's kind of fitting that there are no moving lines. So this indicates that we just shouldn't expect much to be happening. I mean, the army. Okay, you think about the army, you think about military force, being part of an army. Where is the army going? Is the army going anywhere? So it could be with the army that we realize we do have to kind of get ourselves together, that we have to perhaps be part of a larger group because we're preparing for something. But what exactly are we preparing for? There seems to be a lack of aim, a lack of purpose here. And so it could be a preparation for absolutely nothing. And so people might come together in a group. It depends what you're doing, but you may feel that you're part of a group. It could be an online group, it could be a real group. And then the question is, where is it going? It's like the Grand Old Duke of York. He marched his army to the top of a hill and he marched it down again. Why? What is the purpose? It's just some pointless maneuver. And so that might be something that you're aware of, that maybe it's not you, it's maybe other people moving around. It all seems very grand, but it's just not going anywhere. And that's because we've got no moving lines. Now, we do have a nuclear hexagram here, and I look at the nuclear hexagram if there are no moving lines. And the nuclear hexagram for the army is hexagram number 24, which is return. And so this is kind of more of the same. So the army is, with the nuclear hexagram, return. Return is about return to normality. We advance as far as we can, and we realize that we've gone as far as we can, and then we just go back. It's no disgrace. It is a retreat in a way, but we've taken things up to a point, and then we've realized that that's it. And so I haven't really got a great deal to say about this I Ching, because it seems to reinforce the astrology that really not much is happening. And we have grand ideas. Maybe other people have grand ideas. They may talk about collective action, but is it going anywhere? I don't think it really is. If it's going anywhere, it's going home, because it's going to return back to where it started. And I want to finish by looking at the stabbing that took place in the UK on Saturday, and it's getting a lot of news. As far as I understand, from what I've read so far, the news might change. So what happened was that there was a train going from Doncaster to King's Cross. King's Cross is a station in London. And so looking at at the train. Yeah, here it is. So it left Doncaster at 25 minutes past 6. So where is Doncaster? It's kind of north-eastish England. I mean, my English geography is not very good, and I spent all my time in England in southeast. I never really went to the north very much. So it's not a town that I know much about, or know anything about at all, actually. But this train, it left Doncaster at 25 minutes past 6 in the evening, and it was coming towards the end of its journey when there was stabbing. I'm not sure whether it's one or three. I think two people were stabbing people. It was stabbing passengers on the train, and it went on for some time. And I don't know, 10 people were injured, and some of them have been released from hospital. The last I saw, that there are still a couple of people with life-threatening injuries. And the question is why. And of course, people's immediate suspicion was that it was a terrorist attack. And of course, there was an association with illegal immigrants. Because there's been recent stabbings by illegal immigrants in the UK, and so that was perhaps an immediate assumption that some people made. But as it happened, the two people who were involved in, who have alleged to have been involved in the stabbing, or have been arrested for it, were both born in the UK. So it's not about illegal immigration or anything like that. But still, it's a major event. It would indicate that something is wrong with society if people go around stabbing train passengers. And trains are very important in the UK. It's not like America, where people drive everywhere. People need trains to get to work, and public transport is important. So perhaps that's one reason why it's so troubling, because everyone travels by train, or not everyone, but a lot of people travel by train in the UK. So this is a chart for when the train left Doncaster, 6:25 p.m. Now this is a departure chart, so you could say that trip from Doncaster to King's Cross, London, has its own horoscope. So I think that's a good place to start. And one thing that was happening on Saturday was that Mars was making a conjunction to true Black Moon Lilith. I think that Mars, true Black Moon Lilith, that seems to describe it relatively well. I mean, Mars in Scorpio represents anger and attacking things, and conjunct true Black Moon Lilith. Well, true Black Moon Lilith, you could just say that is a nasty influence. True Black Moon Lilith represents darker forces that we don't understand. We do not know why the stabbing took place. It's now being said that it's not a terrorist incident. What is the definition of a terrorist incident? Well, I suppose a terrorist incident is when someone does something perhaps because there's some political reason. They have some reason to do it. I think that's what the police are saying. There doesn't seem to be any reason to do it. Obviously there's some reason. There's some psychological reason why it was done, at the very least. And that might be represented by true Black Moon Lilith. Now, one thing about true Black Moon Lilith, there is a mean Black Moon Lilith and there's a true Black Moon Lilith. And as I've said on several occasions, I use true Black Moon Lilith. If we were to use mean Black Moon Lilith, just to show you what the chart would look like, if I used mean Black Moon Lilith instead of true Black Moon Lilith, if I switch to the mean Black Moon Lilith, mean Black Moon Lilith would have been at 24:31 Scorpio. So mean Black Moon Lilith would have been over 3 degrees off Mars. And I mean, I think using a true Black Moon Lilith, seems more reasonable and it seems more obvious. Now, there are other reasons why you shouldn't use mean true black moon Lilith. I mean, sorry, I shouldn't tell you you shouldn't do anything, but I don't see the logic of using true black moon Lilith. So that's one aspect of it. And we also have the moon conjunct the North Node, and I wonder what that means. I mean, the moon is in Pisces, so you could say that the moon in Pisces is about things just happening, and Pisces, Pisces can be a very nice sign, but it can be quite a dangerous sign in certain cases. People just do stuff, and Mars is starting to make a trine to Neptune. Mars and true black moon Lilith are making a trine to Neptune, and so it could be that whoever is involved in this crime was kind of psychologically influenced by what's going on astrologically. So that's why it's rather difficult to get this chart in real perspective, because we don't have the horoscopes of those involved. Maybe the horoscopes will or at least the birth dates will at some stage come about. But it's all very, very fluid, and unfortunately, being fluid, you have an idea, you're angry about something, and maybe some people it just naturally, what's happening psychologically turns into something physical, and you take a knife and you go through a train stabbing people, and so maybe Mars conjunct true black moon Lilith trine Neptune, and with moon, even the moon conjunct the North Node is saying something about it. It's a very watery event. Now, as far as the midpoints are concerned, for when the train left, and a lot of these positions are not going to change much. I mean, okay, the ascendant will change, but the attack happened, not much more than an hour afterwards. So as far as the midpoints are concerned, let's see what see, Mars is on the Sun, Moon, and Sun Node midpoint. So that's important. So when you've got Mars aspecting the Sun, Moon midpoint, oops, sorry, that's the wrong chart. So there's a Sun, there's a Moon. So the Sun, Moon midpoint would be at about 12 Capricorn. So at about where's the exact Sun Moon midpoint? So the exact Sun Moon midpoint would be in Capricorn, and it would be at about 13 Capricorn. So in other words, Mars is approximately, is making a semi-square to the Sun Moon midpoint. So you can see this on the 90-degree dial. So let's look at the 90-degree dial. So let's move this on. So there's Mars, and there is the Sun Moon midpoint. So when you've got something on the Sun Moon midpoint, that planet tends to be quite prominent, and it is a Mars event, and it's not just Mars aspecting the Sun Moon midpoint by semi-square, but it's also true black moon Lilith. So with Mars and true black moon Lilith on the Sun Moon midpoint, those two planets are really strongly configured. So then we move to the stabbing itself. We don't quite know, at least I don't know at the moment, when the stabbing was, because it happened just after the train left Peterborough station. So there are Peterborough and Huntingdon are two towns in Cambridgeshire, and so it went to Peterborough. Then the stabbing started after it left Peterborough station, and then the train was stopped at Huntingdon station because someone pulled the emergency cord. So we know what time people phone the police, but that might not be quite the same time as when the stabbing started. But I think that we can be reasonably sure that Cancer was rising. So it's, again, it's not a chart that is so different from the chart from when it left Doncaster, because I know that from the UK perspective, London and Doncaster are miles and miles away, but certainly by American standards, it's nothing. London to Doncaster, it's just a couple of hours in a train. It is nothing, and so we see something very similar, and we see the ascendant has moved on. We've got Cancer rising, and you've got Sun trine the ascendant. So there's just a lot of water around, and this does highlight the point that it was a fairly watery event. We're talking about people's psychology and perhaps people's psychological instability. So the question is, would we have been able to predict this event? I don't think so. I think it would have been impossible to predict this event. I mean, we could have a look at the previous new moon. So here is the new moon before the event. So there was a new moon on October the 21st at 28 degrees 22 Libra. Now, on the surface, this new moon doesn't seem to be very spectacular. I mean, you're just looking at nothing. Nothing is angular. What is there to look at? But there is one thing that's important about this moon, and this new moon. It is the midheaven. So when we do new moons to try to predict events taking place, say, over the next couple of weeks, we might look at the midheaven and the ascendant, because the midheaven is special. The midheaven is special to that particular longitude, to that particular longitude, and so this midheaven, the midheaven is, there's a new moon. The new moon is about 10 degrees short of the midheaven, and there's the Mercury-Mars conjunction, which is 10 degrees after the midheaven. So the midheaven set for Peterborough is on the Sun-Mars midpoint, it's on the Moon-Mercury midpoint, and it's on the new Moon-Mars midpoint and the new Moon-Mercury midpoint. And so that, I think, is really important. It's very significant. It still makes it really difficult to make a forecast about this, because this would have been true for a great swathe of the earth. You go down through sort of the UK and France and parts of Africa and Spain to actually pinpoint Peterborough as where the event would happen is next to impossible. So we are looking at this, certainly with the benefit of hindsight, and so looking at the midheaven on this. So where's the midheaven gone? So putting the midheaven on the dial. There is the Mars-Mercury conjunction, and at the time of the new moon, and there is the new moon itself. So the Mars-Mercury and the new moon is completely configured by this midheaven, and so I think that certainly helps explain why this event happened. But again, to actually predict this event, to say, oh well, this is going to happen in this place and it's going to be on a train, I think that is really hard work, and I don't think that's something that we're going to be able to do. And finally, I just wanted to look at the UK, because it does say something about the UK. It's a major news story, and even though it's not a terrorist attack and is not connected with illegal immigrants, it still says something about what is wrong with the UK. People have been concerned about stabbing. Well, for some time there have been a lot of stabbing in the UK, more stabbing than people could really tolerate. And so this is such a public event that someone's going to want to do something about it. And so here is a chart for England. It's the 1066 chart, so it might be just a reminder about what is happening in this country. I mean, there are a number of things going on, obviously, but Neptune is on Britain's moon, the 1066 moon. So England's moon is at 29.4 Pisces. Neptune is retrograde 29.47 Pisces. So this stabbing is just symptomatic, perhaps, of Neptune on the moon. The moon represents the people. Neptune perhaps represents the craziness of the people or the uncertainty of the people. And so I think that it really does indicate that something is not entirely right. And also we had a moon north node conjunction at the time of the stabbing, and England's the 1066 south node is at 19 Pisces, so the north node is crossing Britain's south node and the moon is on the south node, and it seems to me that this is just an indication of the fact that the country is going in the wrong direction. And if you take the 1066 chart as being the most important chart, the UK needs to get away from Pisces. Pisces perhaps is about chaos, it's about lawlessness, it's perhaps about trying too hard to empathize. That's one way of looking at Pisces. And maybe as a country, the UK works best, particularly England works best when it's able to function in its north node. Its north node in Virgo. And we have the UK, the 1066 chart, which I know the 1066 chart was a chart for England rather than the UK as a whole. It's not about Scotland, not about Wales originally, but because England has had this sort of dominant position in the British Isles, I think we can look at the 1066 chart when William I became king. Saturn was conjunct the north node in Virgo. Now we have Saturn kind of conjunct the north node in Pisces, and that really just does indicate that things have gone wrong, and England needs to perhaps go back to being a harsher and more formal place. I mean, I'm not saying that's the same for every country, and each country has to work things out in its own way, but Britain's just become too much of a Pisces country, and I think that it's that moon in the north node, that moon conjunct the south node in Pisces is really starting to manifest, and so that might be just what the stabbing is reminding us of, and we need to somehow find a way of getting back to that Virgo north node. So I haven't got a lot to say about the stabbing because there isn't really a lot of information. It would be great if one had the birth times of the perpetrators, but maybe those will come to light sort of later on. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.